Hello and welcome to News 18 Global with me, Ayushman Singh Jamwa. Ladies and gentlemen, our top story. The heat is on in the US presidential elections. Nikki Haley has come up with a fresh set of arguments and questioned Donald Trump's ability to become the president of the United States at the age of 77. Now, Trump's continuous verbal gaffes make him unfit to be president, according to Nikki Haley. Haley also suggested that Trump should take a cognitive test, an attack that came after the former US president recently confused her with former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. On another occasion, Trump slurred his words and said that former President Barack Obama was still in office. Trump, on the other hand, did not keep mum and hit back at Nikki Haley. Trump claimed he feels sharper than he did 20 years ago and nobody running for president should take an aptitude or cognitive test. Trump and Haley go head-to-head to grab the Republican nomination for the presidency of the United States. Remember, the fight is likely to be between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Now, while Trump has emerged as a clear frontrunner, Nikki Haley is now the only contender left in the race and who is refusing to give up.
Donald Trump was totally unhinged. Unhinged. He was a bit sensitive, and I think his feelings were hurt, but he threw a temper tantrum out on stage, seriously, threw a total temper tantrum, and was talking about revenge. Then the next day, unhinged again, says, for anybody that supports Nikki Haley, you will be barred from MAGA. So we had a little fun with that. We started selling t-shirts that said barred permanently. We sold 10,000 t-shirts. He has said, look, I will take a mental competency test. He said he would take one, and he said that he would beat me. And I don't know, maybe he will, maybe he won't. But if he's going to do that, then he should have no problem getting on a debate stage with me. All that time that he's spending in a courtroom defending himself, he's not fighting for the American people. Like he did on election night in New Hampshire, like he's done on his Twitter feed since he got the verdict. He has not once talked about the fact that he put us $8 trillion in debt in 4 years that our kids are never going to forgive him for.
I'll tell you what, I feel sharper now than I did 20 years ago. I really do. I don't know, it's probably not true. It's probably not true. And I think anybody running for president should take an aptitude or a cognitive test. We're beating everybody. We're beating her by a lot, but we're beating Biden. She can't beat Biden. The polls are showing, the most recent polls, because she doesn't have Republican support. You know what she doesn't have? She doesn't have MAGA. She doesn't have MAGA. There's no MAGA. The radical left Democrats want Nikki Haley because they know she's the easiest person to beat. And she will. She doesn't have Republican support. Our border has become a weapon of mass destruction, our destruction. You know, it's ours. It's a weapon of mass destruction. Nobody to this day can explain why this open wound is good for our country. And even politically, why is it good politically? First of all, with the Hispanic vote, we're doing better now than the Democrat Party. So I think it's good for us. But we're going to seal the border, complete it, and we're going to repeal the invasion.
And I'm joined on the broadcast by Adele Nazarian, Senior Fellow at the Gold Institute for International Strategy. Adele, how do you see this kind of bickering kind of fight between Donald Trump and Nikki Haley? I mean, it's less on policy, more on each other's personalities. That's the narrative that's kind of emerging from the fight for the Republican presidential nomination. Do you think Nikki Haley still has a shot once we head into other states in the primary race?
Great to be on with you. I think it's hilarious, honestly. Entertainment is back. Aside from that, I think this has really divulged into what is a popularity contest. I think that, name calling wasn't the norm. I think, unfortunately, it's become the norm. And taking jabs at each other, it seems the law isn't really abiding by its own book. And I think because of that, it's devolved into this absolute name calling, whatever you want to call it, slinging contest. I think that, of course, beyond the South Carolina primary, that the caucuses, that Nikki Haley will determine so much. It's her home state, of course. It depends on how well she performs in her home state, whether she wins it, whether she loses it, by how much she wins it. And I do happen to think that it's going to be tougher for her going into this. I think that President Biden calling Trump the presumptive nominee is sending so many mixed signals too. On the one hand, you have mixed polling. Some polls show Nikki Haley beating Joe Biden in a general election. Other polls show Trump basically beating him by a little margin, but not necessarily enough. So I think based on what President Biden has stated, he feels more confident that he could beat Trump in a general election. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so quick to come out and to say that Trump is the presumptive nominee. That said, I do happen to agree with Trump's analysis that should Nikki Haley be the nominee for the Republicans, that she would have a more difficult time garnering support of the, of course, MAGA base. And of course, beyond that, more conservative Lockhart Republicans. And that happens to still be a pretty significant majority of, I think, Republicans in most of the United States. So those are things that have to be taken into account when considering a matchup like that. And so I think Donald Trump is at a strategic advantage when it comes to considering the real demographic party of America.
Right. And I'm looking at the language in the entire campaign. Nikki Haley is going out of her way, unlike her other contenders who have now dropped out of the race. She is going, like full steam ahead when it comes to attacking Donald Trump, saying that he's not fit to be president. He's tied up in so many legal cases. He's not, right up there, as they say. And, at the same time, he has a dismal track record. She's pointed out the fact that, he's put the nation in debt by $8 trillion more. At the same time, Donald Trump is using the classic buzzwords. The border has become a weapon of mass destruction. The Hunter Biden family is corrupt. The radical left is trying to derail the American dream. And there is a witch hunt against him when it comes to the, as he says, the weaponization of the Justice Department against him. Now, given the difference in narrative between these two, do you think Donald Trump is rallying the Republican base a lot more? And Nikki Haley, by just targeting Donald Trump and primarily basing her narrative on that, she is alienating a lot of the Republican voters who are, pretty much upset with Joe Biden, and they're not seeing that direct attack against Joe Biden coming in from Nikki Haley.
I think that's an excellent point that you're making there and asking about. I think it's interesting to consider, you're right, Donald Trump, every president inherits the debt of the previous administration, right? And also the incoming president inherits the boon and the successes of the previous administration. This is historically accurate. And President Biden, if you look at the debt that he's incurred for the country by having these wars that are underway in Eastern Europe, in the Middle East, I think the debt is much higher than what President Trump incurred, right? So I think that is very telling that you're seeing this level of harsh Republican infighting between Nikki Haley and Donald Trump and her attacking him. And I don't think that the gaffe that he made where he compared Nancy Pelosi, mistook Nikki Haley for Nancy Pelosi, I think he was intentional, to be honest with you. I think he was trying to prove a point that he sees her as a Democrat and not as a Republican. And I think that it's actually had an impact. And I think what you're saying here is that the fact that she is focusing on fighting Trump as opposed to fighting who should be her clear opponent, President Biden, is very telling. And that's the kind of situation that gets the Republican Party, Democratic Party into trouble, when there is more infighting than there is against the opponent. And that's one of the things that historically has also caused the party that has it happening to get in trouble. And I think historically, I've seen personally that this kind of infighting tends to happen more on the Republican side. And for the sake of the party, I would hope that that is less the case going forward. But you're absolutely right about pointing out the fact that the attention is a bit misdirected, I would say, when it comes to this.
Right,
from the Haley camp.
Right, but Adele, at the same time, given Donald Trump's strategy to discredit Nikki Haley, given the fact that I remember when he started his presidential campaign, the kind of, really awful things he said against women, not just, female leaders in the Republican Party, but the wives of his competitors for the Republican nomination. Do you think there is a kind of a constant net around Donald Trump trying to maintain his focus on Joe Biden, because he could really get into more trouble given his legal problems? He could get into more trouble if he makes some really sexist or misogynist remarks against Nikki Haley, because I get the feeling it's right there. He's just this close to saying it, but then he reels it back in and, hits out at Joe Biden. Is there, in your opinion, a very conscious decision to not keep the narrative around Nikki Haley, given Donald Trump's propensity to say something very controversial?
I think that the controversy and the speech, of course, there is a certain level of decorum and expectation, which is also not to go personal, right, with family members. Unfortunately, the media decided also to get personal and to go after Trump's family. I personally, if I were running for president, I would steer clear of going after other candidates' personal lives, unless, of course, they end up going after you, then you have to kind of triple down. But to answer your question, I do think that there is, unfortunately, I will tell you personally that I have seen the way that these cases have been handled against him. And while there is some merit to some of them, the majority of them, the ones that have been the headline grabbers, things weren't exactly done according to law. And that is very unfortunate for the justice system in America, frankly, which concerns me. But I do think that he has seen what the media and the justice system are capable of doing, and he probably is taking a bit of a more cautious approach to certain words that are used in order to avoid further scrutiny, because no matter what he says, no matter what he does, there's going to be something coming out, whether it's a twisting of his words, cherry picking certain clips to edit them according to what will benefit the narrative of the media at that particular day. He does have to be extra cautious, and that's just kind of the way the game works. And I think that it would also be interesting in this, for the sake of full transparency, to see that I would like to personally see that more politicians are able to uphold a higher level of personal integrity. We've heard things coming out of, the Nikki Haley camp, the Donald Trump camp, all the different camps. But I think that hypocrisy is what gets everyone into trouble at the end of the day. And if you're going to end up going after people for their personal lives, then they're going to probably expect to get the same in return. That's kind of the law of physics, if you want to call it. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And I think that's what we're witnessing here on full display.
Right, but something that was very central to Donald Trump's political branding was the kind of language he was using. And I believe it kind of rallied the MAGA base around him. All the kind of language he said. You go to the MAGA rallies, you see the visuals, you see all of those very, deplorable statements that he made have been turned into T-shirts, and all the MAGA supporters are wearing those. So I feel at the end of the day, it's a superpower of his to even turn the most controversial of his statements into political power. But clearly, I sense he's being very cautious over here. My final question, Adele, we've seen a lot of Trump's contenders who dropped out of the race now, if you will, kissing Donald Trump's ring. They're all, standing behind him in all his press conferences, from Vivek Ramaswamy to all the other Republican, leaders, trying their best to kind of gain his favor, because they feel that, they should find a place in his cabinet if he wins the presidency. Do you think Nikki Haley will do the same if she sees that the numbers are going against her? It's time for her to drop out. Do you think she will kiss the ring? Because she served in his first administration. Do you think she will shift focus, shift gears, and then try to suck up to Donald Trump after she pulls out of the race?
That's an excellent question. Personally, I think she'd be very reluctant, to be frank with you, if she ends up not being the nominee, to quote unquote suck up to him. I think at most, if there is to be some kind of a, let's say, concession or a rallying attempt to get the Republican base to rally behind, let's say, the presumptive nominee, should it be Trump, it would be a more neutral statement that would include a focus not on Donald Trump as the nominee, but on the future of the Republic, of the Republican Party, and of the country. And I think that would be a very, very eloquent and powerful way for former Ambassador Haley to approach the situation. I personally don't see her taking the same approach, of course, as other people have taken. And I do not foresee, even if Trump does become the nominee and eventually president again, let's say, I don't really see a position for Haley in the future of that administration. And so I think those bridges have all been burned. But showing personal tact is something that I think she's very capable of. And after this all is said and done, she will probably make a statement, very political statement, diplomatic statement, something she's very good at, obviously, in order to, for the sake of maintaining, let's say, the Republican Party from fissuring and fracturing.
Right. Thank you,
It
Adele.
remains to be seen, though.
Right, of course, it remains to be seen, but we've seen it in the past. His biggest critics become his biggest allies, especially in the Republican Party. The examples are there, from Lindsey Graham to even, Chris Christie. We've seen it so many times. They attack him, and then just after he gains some political power, they're back in his camp saying that they didn't mean what they said. This thing has happened around Donald Trump. This orbit has been around him ever since he became president, even when he campaigned to become president. But thank you, Adele Nazarian, for sharing your perspective on the political dynamics in the Republican Party ahead of the fight for the US presidency.